The cul-de-sac was a picture of suburban perfection. Each home stood like a well-groomed soldier in a tidy formation. The lawns were manicured, the driveways swept clean, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly baked cookies from the house on the corner. You could almost taste the tranquility. It was a stage set for peace, though I had learned that appearances could be deceiving. I had settled into this slice of tranquility just months ago, drawn by the promise of calm weekends and friendly neighbors who, I imagined, would wave amicably as we passed each other on morning walks. The universe, however, had a peculiar sense of humor. Enter Karen, the self-appointed sentinel of the Homeowners Association, who took her duties with a zeal that bordered on religious fervor. Her gaze was like a hawk's, scanning the streets for any deviation from the sacred HOA commandments. The first hint of her presence was the note left on my door. It was typed in a meticulous font with an unjustifiable use of bold, as if to compensate for the triviality of its content. The offense? A garden gnome, apparently too jovial for the standards she upheld. I read the note with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Surely this was a test of my patience. I obliged, moving the gnome strategically behind a bush. Perhaps the leaves would muffle its cheeriness. Karen's eyes, however, seemed to have a competence for uncovering joy. I began to see her more frequently, her silhouette etched against the backdrop of twilight. She marched with purpose, a clipboard in hand, eyes scanning, searching for her next mission. Yet, as I watched her from my window, I felt no malice, only a curious pity for someone whose world might be so small. Then came the package. It was a delivery I'd awaited eagerly. A new bookshelf, flat-packed into a box that seemed to defy the laws of geometry. It sat on my porch like an elephant in the room, conspicuous and unapologetic. Karen's eyes must have widened at the sight. The shadows lengthened, and I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that precedes a storm. I was peeling an apple in the kitchen when I noticed the police car, its lights flashing in vivid contradiction to the calm evening. The officer approached with the weariness of someone familiar with misplaced priorities. Karen was not far behind, her gestures animated, as she recounted a tale of suspicion and probable cause. The officer, to his credit, wore a mask of professionalism. My response was one of practiced calm, a gentle rebuke to the absurdity. The box was opened, the contents revealed in their innocuous glory. A bookshelf, nothing more. The officer nodded, his eyes holding a glint of irony as he turned to Karen. It was a performance, and she had played her part with unrestrained fervor. The officer departed, the tension diffusing into the evening air. Karen, undeterred, retreated with a backward glance, as if to say this wasn't over. In the quiet that followed, I stood on my porch, the remnants of sunlight casting long shadows. I pondered, not for the first time, the oddities of human nature. My garden gnome peeked cheekily from its hiding place, and I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. Karen's siren call to the authorities had been just the opening act. Her warpath was paved with a ferocious blend of righteous indignation and oddly personal vendetta. After the police left, shaking their heads and perhaps questioning their life choices, Karen didn't retreat to her lair. She launched a full frontal assault, equipped with the considerable arsenal of the HOA handbook, a tome she wielded like an ancient grimoire. The rules, once mere suggestions penned in dry ink, now bore down on us like commandments engraved in stone. Each page a tool to chisel away at the neighborhood's collective patience. Minutes after the patrol cars disappeared around the corner, Karen was already tapping out furious emails, her fingers dancing like a grim pianist working a macabre symphony. And so it began. The first missive arrived, slipped under my door with the stealth of a paper assassin. It listed infractions with the precision of a tax audit. The grass apparently was an egregious half-inch too tall. The color of my mailbox, she decided, was an affront to community aesthetics, a rebellious shade of midnight blue against a sea of mundane beige. She was relentless in her pursuit of conformity, a relentless tide attempting to swallow the shore. But it didn't stop at me. Like a disease, her campaign spread, infecting the entire block. Notes appeared overnight on other doors, too, etched with accusations of non-compliance. Lawns needed trimming, fences repainting, cars parking in this angle. Not that. By the time the sun rose, we were all bit players in Karen's dystopian vision of suburban perfection. Karen's tactics were not limited to written warnings. Gossip, that perennial undercurrent of suburbia, became her weapon of choice. Whispers morphed into rumors and then into accepted truths, passed along with knowing nods and sideways glances. I became the package guy, a title enunciated with a mix of pity and disdain. My parcel, innocuous and forgotten, became infamous in its absence. In the grocery store, faces I had known for years now seemed unfamiliar, their eyes sliding away like oil on water. Conversations halted at my approach, picking up only after I passed, their tones hushed and conspiratorial. It was as if Karen had painted a scarlet letter upon my door, only visible to those attuned to her frequency. I often wondered if my porch light cast too harsh a glow at night, or if my dog's bark cut too sharply through the evening air. I caught myself tiptoeing around my own life, a prisoner within the confines of my home and yard, all to avoid the ever-watchful gaze of the self-appointed neighborhood sentinel. Yet, beneath it all, simmered something else, a quiet rebellion, like the trickle of a stream plotting to carve its own path through stone. Neighbors, driven together under the weight of her scrutiny, began to share their own stories in hushed tones, like confessions whispered in a dim cathedral. Bonds forged in shared adversity are stronger, I realized, than those knit in idle pleasantries. This was more than just a battle over a package. It was a struggle for the soul of the neighborhood, for the right to live without constant judgment and unfounded accusations. The community, once fragmented by fear and whispered slander, was beginning to rally. There was a sense of unity in our silent defiance, an understanding that we were not alone in this. Karen's reign, for all its grandiosity, was a house of cards. Each new edict, each heavy-handed interpretation of the rules only added to a growing stack, teetering precariously as the winds of discontent began to rise. And so we waited, biding our time like villagers in a fable, plotting quietly in the shadow of the dragon's lair. The tide would turn. Of that, I was certain. The blue and red lights had faded, leaving behind a shadow of resentment that danced on the edges of my consciousness. Karen had retreated into her fortress of rules and regulations, the neighborhood's self-appointed sentinel, her presence lingering like a stale perfume. I watched from my window as she tightened her robe around her like a cloak of authority. She had wielded her influence with precision, a surgeon of pettiness, making the mundane seem menacing. The package, my package, sat on the porch, innocuous yet monumental. It was the catalyst for this manufactured chaos, a symbol of my defiance against her tyranny. To Karen, it was an aberration, a challenge to her meticulously curated order. It was too large. She had proclaimed with her usual blend of righteousness and hysteria, an affront to the aesthetic equilibrium of our suburban enclave. In the aftermath, I became the chronicler of this absurdity. I documented everything: the calls, the visits, the whispers that rippled through our tight-knit community like a stone skimming across water. Each note, each scribble was a testament to her overreach, my quiet rebellion etched in ink. My recordings became a tapestry of absurdity, a chronicle of Karen's crusade against the imagined chaos I had supposedly wrought. Her complaints were as predictable as the changing of the seasons, yet under her rigid exterior there lay a vulnerability she could never conceal. It was there in the way she peered from behind her curtains when she thought no one was looking, a silent witness to her own unraveling. The neighborhood murmured in response, a chorus of muted opinions and unspoken alliances. Some rallied to her cause, eager to curry favor or avoid her ire. Others, more discreet, nodded in quiet solidarity with me. A nod that said, "Hold on. Stand firm. This too shall pass." My counter was subtle, a reflection of her own methods. I embraced the irony and prepared my rebuttal with the precision of a chess master. Each move calculated, each piece advanced with purpose. I understood her better than she realized, her fears, her need for control, her desperation to matter. I documented the landscape of my porch, every angle, every shadow, every beam of sunlight that danced across the package. I captured the ordinary and the extraordinary in equal measure, shaping my narrative with the patience of a sculptor. I prepared to present it all, a dossier of normalcy and excess, a testament to the mundane. On the appointed day, I delivered my compendium to the HOA board, a gentle unveiling of her machinations. I attended the meeting with an air of nonchalance, leaning back in my chair as the pages turned. Time slowed, each breath synchronized with the ticking of the clock on the wall. Faces flickered with understanding and, perhaps, a touch of remorse. It was a game of shadows and light, of rules bent but not broken. And in the unspoken moment after my presentation, the room tilted. Karen's facade flickered, momentarily destabilized. The burden of her own eccentricities pressed against her, a weight she could no longer ignore. My package sat untouched and unremarkable, a monument to the absurdity of her overreach. It was just a package, after all, no more, no less. And as I left the meeting room, I felt not triumph, but a calm resignation. The balance had shifted, ever so slightly, in the favor of reason and restraint. I stepped into the sunlight, the air crisp with the promise of change. The world felt different, lighter, as if the universe itself had exhaled. I glanced back one last time, and there she stood, her silhouette framed by the doorway, trapped in the prison of her own making. The morning sun spilled over the horizon, draping my kitchen in a soft, forgiving light. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window. Outside, the neighborhood wore its facade of tranquility, each house a silent sentry of suburban pretense. But beneath the surface, tension simmered, a pot lid barely held down by the weight of expectation. After Karen's latest stunt, my appetite for reprisal had waned from the fiery impulse of retaliation to a simmering desire for justice. There was no need for theatrics. The law, with its measured, relentless grind, would be my ally. I had consulted with a lawyer, a woman who shared my appreciation for quiet retribution. Together, we crafted our strategy like a painter choosing her palette, deliberately, with an eye for impact. The first step was a cease and desist letter, a simple yet potent document. It lay in my hands now, the weight of it far greater than its physical form. Karen's actions had been a tapestry of intrusions, each thread woven with malice and misguided power. This letter would tug at those threads, unraveling the fabric of her assumed authority. I imagined Karen opening it, her meticulously groomed eyebrows arching in disbelief, indignation flaring like a match struck in the dark. She would read the accusations, the formal language a stark contrast to the chaos she had sown. There was a satisfaction in this image, a serene assurance that justice, though slow, was inevitable. That afternoon, I walked deliberately to the mailbox, the letter in hand. Each step on the pavement was a beat in the rhythm of resolution. The neighborhood watched with its usual indifference, oblivious to the significance of this small act. I slipped the letter into the box, closing the lid with a quiet finality. Returning home, I felt an odd lightness. There was no dramatic release, no cathartic climax, just a sense of turning a page, moving forward. The landscape of the neighborhood remained unchanged, yet within its boundaries, a subtle shift had occurred. In the days that followed, I noticed a difference. Karen's presence, once a looming shadow, seemed diminished. Her movements were more measured, her glances less frequent. The neighborhood began to breathe again, the air less charged with her oppressive scrutiny. One day, as I was tending to the garden, I saw her. She stood across the street, her posture rigid. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment there was a flicker of something, not quite understanding, but perhaps recognition. She looked away, her facade cracking ever so slightly. The veneer of her authority had thinned, revealing the vulnerability beneath. I returned to my work, the garden soil cool and forgiving beneath my hands. The plants, unaffected by human drama, continued to grow, reaching towards the sun with quiet determination. It was a lesson in resilience, this ability to thrive amidst adversity. I found comfort in that. The days stretched into weeks, the neighborhood settling into a new equilibrium. Karen's reign of petty tyranny had waned, her voice now just another note in the symphony of suburban life. I had learned the value of patience, the potency of quiet strength. In this small corner of the world, life continued its inexorable march. The mailbox stood empty, a silent testament to battles fought and won. And as I watched the changing seasons, I knew the landscape would remember, even if Karen chose to forget. The morning sun seeped through the curtains, casting amber streaks across my living room. It was a rare moment of silence, an interlude in the chaos that had swirled since the day Karen spotted the oversized package on my porch. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitter warmth anchor me. Today was the community meeting, the day everything would come full circle. The air outside carried the scent of damp earth, a remnant of last night's rain. As I made my way to the community hall, each step felt deliberate, the soles of my shoes pressing into the softened ground. The neighborhood was waking up, a few neighbors nodding as I passed. We shared a mutual understanding now, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had weathered together. The hall was already buzzing with murmurs and shifting chairs. Faces turned as I entered, a collective gaze that held curiosity, solidarity, and a touch of anticipation. Karen was there too, her presence unmistakable, a rigid statue amidst the ebb and flow of community life. Her eyes met mine briefly, flickering with something hard to decipher. Defiance? Regret? It didn't matter now. I took my seat, the wooden chair creaking slightly as I settled in. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but there was a charged undercurrent, an electricity in the air. The agenda was simple but potent. Address the growing discontent and, ideally, find a way forward. As the discussion unfolded, I marveled at how swiftly things had shifted. Karen's reign of petty terror, her obsession with order, had sparked something unintended. Neighbors, once separated by fear of her wrath, had found common ground. Shared grievances became the mortar that strengthened our bonds. I listened as others spoke, their voices carrying the weight of recent events. Stories spilled out, small acts of tyranny that, on their own, seemed trivial, but together painted a vivid portrait of control gone awry. Each tale was a brushstroke, crafting a canvas that was impossible to ignore. Then came the moment. A pause in the dialogue, a collective breath. I felt the gaze of the room on me, an unspoken invitation to speak. My heart beat steadily, a rhythm of inevitability. I rose, words forming with clarity. No grand speeches, just a quiet recounting of facts. The package had been a catalyst, a tipping point that revealed fractures long present. I spoke of community, of the need for trust and understanding. My voice was steady, resonating in the stillness. There was no need for grand gestures or raised voices. The truth had its own power. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with potential. Karen shifted in her seat, her face a mask of neutrality. But beneath that facade, something crumbled. A collective realization settled over the room, a decision made without words. And just like that, the tide turned. Karen's influence waned, her isolation apparent. The community, once held in the grip of her scrutiny, began to reclaim its narrative. It was subtle at first, a gentle ripple of change that promised to grow. As the meeting adjourned, I lingered for a moment, watching as neighbors gathered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by laughter and nods of agreement. The hall slowly emptied, leaving behind the echoes of resolution and a future that seemed somehow brighter. Outside, the sun had risen higher, bathing everything in a golden glow. I walked home, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. The air was crisp, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. Karen was no longer the shadow looming over us. She was just another figure in the tapestry of our lives, her edges softened by the collective will of a community that had found its voice.